Hi everyone, thank you for joining me today. My name is Manny. Today I'm going to be discussing how to use data analytics to detect employee morale and employee sentiment issues. If you are running an organization, whether big or small, and you're looking to gain more analytical insights on your employees' morale, this is definitely the video for you. So before we begin though, can you please click subscribe and like? It helps a ton. In this channel, I'm going to be posting a lot of videos on data analytics and how to use data analytics to drive your business, and also how to apply data analytics for your personal life. So let's jump right into it. When it comes to employee morale, I would argue the number one metric that most companies rely on is attrition. And what is attrition? Attrition is essentially a percentage of how many employees are leaving your company versus how many are remaining. And a lot of companies will look at it in different time cycles. Most companies will look at it monthly, right? So you can see a sample monthly report on screen, and basically it'll show you the month on the left. It'll say start, which is how many employees you had at the start of the month, how many employees joined your organization, how many employees left the organization, and then what was your ending balance. So when it comes to attrition, you're essentially taking your employees left, dividing it by the end balance, and that gives you your monthly attrition. When it comes to attrition, you should expect some fluctuation month after month, especially if your organization is in retail or in hospitality, or an organization that is very susceptible to seasonality. Then you will definitely see the attrition number change, right? So you can see this is a fairly conventional attrition report, and you'll see that you may have months that your attrition goes up to 19%, but you also have months that you have 0%, right? And really the overall essential employee left pattern seems fairly stable. Now, let's look at an example of a company that, or an organization that may have an attrition issue, right? So the prior sheet that we saw, employees left were fairly consistent, right? However, look at this particular sheet. You can see attrition kind of start off, does have some fluctuation, but then starting in July, you can see it scale up, right? And even go over 100%. So what does that mean? Here you can see on employees left, there's definitely a huge spike from June and forward, and then a sustained pattern of very high attrition compared to its prior pattern. So when you're seeing something like this, definitely raise some red flags, right? Because now you're seeing a sustained pattern of employees that are leaving your organization. And the number one reason that employees leave usually tends to be employee morale. They're not happy where they're at, and they're looking for other opportunities. From an overall perspective, if you see this, it's definitely a red flag, and you should definitely start doing some root cause analyses to find out what is the reason for such a sustained pattern in employee attrition. What I would say though, this is way too big of an oversimplification of attrition. There's really other ways of looking at attrition as well. And the four main ones are involuntary, voluntary, internal, and demographics based. So involuntary means that it was initiated by the employer, or you as the company, right? So these are your downscaling of departments, terminations, any of those numbers, right? And essentially what you want to be mindful of in involuntary is that if you have a rapid spike of involuntary attrition, it may not signify employee morale issues at the present or at the past, but it will definitely signify future employee morale issues. Meaning if employees are seeing that a lot of fellow employees are being either laid off or terminated for X reason, that would indicate definitely a future behavior in terms of employee morale issues. Voluntary is initiated by the employee. Voluntary is one of those indicators that is already happening post-employee morale issue. So you definitely want to keep a real good eye on that one. And once that one is at a higher level than what your organization is used to, normally it indicates that there would be already existing employee morale issues within your organization. Internal usually happens in larger organizations or larger companies that have multiple departments. And there's a whole ton of reasons why internal could be higher for one department versus the other. One could be that your department has a higher concentration of entry-level jobs. And normally you will have a huge influx of employees entering the company within those entry-level jobs, but then going to other departments as their career matures and advances and their desires to grow within the company go through. In that particular scenario, there may not be an employee morale issue, but certainly there are a lack of opportunities within that department. So some of the things to look out for there is, are there any growth opportunities within that department itself to essentially retain more employees? But it could also definitely indicate employee morale, especially if you have two departments that are fairly similar and one has a much higher internal attrition than the other, then that can definitely indicate that there might be some managerial structural issues within that department, or just a lack of motivation activities or lack of incentive to stay in that department. So that's definitely a good metric to look at, especially comparing one to the other in a sense. Now, a newer way of looking at attrition, and it's definitely one of the most important ones already, is demographic based. So what is demographic based? It's basically looking at attrition by age, gender, race. You may have an overall healthy attrition level, even if you divide it by involuntary, voluntary, and internal. But then if you look at the sub demographics under that, right, age, gender, etc., you may have high fluctuations between those, right? And especially if you look at one category, for instance, age, if you start seeing that maybe your attrition is stable, but the average age of attrition is higher, that could indicate that, something within the organization changed and the incentive for those senior employees are no longer there. So you're going to start losing now talent within, or not just talent, but knowledge within the organization. So those are definitely good metrics to look at when you're looking at attrition, to divide it by not just involuntary, voluntary, and internal, but look at it from age, gender, race, and other demographics. And let me show you a quick example of what this would look like if you're looking to really take this to the next level and create a dashboard and productionize this type of analytics. This is not my dashboard. I found it on the internet, but I felt that it did a really good job at illustrating how to do or how to implement attrition analysis with demographics and also other factors as well, right? So you can see on screen, right in the middle, you'll have demographics by gender, you have by business travel, you have by department on the bottom left. Also kind of interesting, especially now with companies returning to work or returning to the office, by distance from home and also by salary hikes. But then you have even more advanced features like predictive attrition. If you have predictive analytics, predictive algorithms built to essentially detect all the data elements and seeing from a predictive standpoint what your attrition is going to look like. This is a very powerful way to detect employee morale, because if you see fluctuations in any of these over time, then you can definitely detect that employee sentiment and employee morale has been impacted. Definitely a good way to kind of take it to the next level, right? When it comes to attrition is building all these analytical insights into a dashboard. One of the other things that you want to look at when it comes to attrition when it comes to employee morale, is that attrition is not the best metric, right? I know I spoke a lot about attrition, and there's so many different ways of slicing and dicing the data, but it's not the best way. Why? Because attrition in and of itself means that your employee has already left. So that is not a good time to fix employee morale issues, right? It is very reactive by nature. If you're using attrition to kind of fix employee morale or to detect if there's employee morale issues, it's too late. So some of the other metrics that you can use, a lot of companies may not have employee satisfaction scores, but they have some way or another to detect customer satisfaction scores. And the interesting part about customer satisfaction is that it is heavily based on employee satisfaction. Why? Because customers make their impression from their interaction with your employees. So if you see any fluctuation in the downward trajectory from a CSAT standpoint, then one of the first places that you should look at is employee satisfaction, right? So if you look at the sample data that I have here, CSAT 2019, 95, 2020, 92, and all of a sudden 2021, 81, that would be a big red flag that employee morale may be on the decline. As part of your root cause analysis, you definitely should check on employee morale. Now, another way to look at, and I don't know if this is the official term, but this is a way that I categorize it, is the average PTO chain length. What is a PTO chain length? Normally for PTO or paid time off, you'll have a certain allotment, right? 2 weeks, 3 weeks for your employees. So you may not see a fluctuation in the total PTO that they take, but what you would see is how many consecutive days do they take, right? And a healthy PTO chain date is somewhere around 3 to 5 on average, right? That means that every time that your employee goes on PTO, they're taking about 3 to 5 days, right? So that usually incorporates vacation and long-term vacations like flights and things like that. But when you start seeing your PTO chain date go down, that means that employees are taking shorter bursts of PTO, meaning that they're working maybe 2 weeks and then taking a day off, working 1 week, then taking another day off, working 2.5 weeks and taking another day off. And the reason why that may present an insight on employee morale is that generally if, it's normal behavior to kind of work through a certain amount of weeks, but then, or a certain amount of months and then take days off, right? So if you're starting to have employees take shorter bursts, that may indicate that they don't want to be, at work. They're not enjoying what they're doing, and they just need to kind of take, more frequent breaks in a sense. And the reason why that is an issue is because that's usually the sign, kind of like the precursor to employee attrition, right? That's why you definitely want to take a look, a close eye into that. I would argue yearly is probably too broad. You definitely want to look at it more from a month by month perspective and see, if that's fluctuating up and down. And if it's going down, definitely let's look at employee morale and see how that is affecting these numbers. And then a one that would have a financial impact is your average sick days. So if employees are calling out sick more over time and on average more, that may indicate employee morale issues, right? It's very rare to see a full organization scale up on sick days if it's not an employee morale issue. In fact, even during the pandemic, because of the migration to working from home, a lot of companies actually saw a decline in sick days as opposed to increase. So if you're seeing an increase, that's definitely a huge red flag. And remember, this is not just from an individual employee level. This is on average from an organization level. That definitely would be a matter of concern and a huge red flag that employee morale may be on the decline. I know I threw a lot of numbers, and I know I already debunked that, attrition is not the best metric. I would argue all of these metrics are also not the best metric to detect if there's an employee morale issue. The best metric to detect if there's an employee morale issue is, believe it or not, the employee. You have to have direct methods of employee feedback. There's no metric out there, no numeric value that's going to give you the most straightforward feedback as the employee can, right? So you have to create the tunnels, create the connectors so that employees have that venue in order to express that feedback. Number one thing, especially after the pandemic, is formalizing the informal, especially if you have a workforce that's working remote or a hybrid approach. You have to formalize informal conversations, meaning set up weekly calls where the team can just discuss anything they want, right? Whether it's work-related, not work-related, just having that platform that they can share information and share how they feel. It's super important. And then through those conversations, listen intently and obviously don't apply work to it, right? It's listening for your employee sentiment, how they feel. What are some of the things that as an organization and as a manager and as a leader, we can do to essentially adjust and be able to make our employees feel more welcome, more inclusive in the organization. Set up frequent one-on-one meetings, right? A lot of employees would rather share information on a one-on-one basis. Having that constant engagement with your employees goes a long way. And then if the problem has elevated to that it's affecting attrition, some of the things that you may want to bring in are third party, just a third perspective that they can conduct feedback sessions, feedback surveys. The reason why a lot of times employees, especially when there's a systemic issue with employee morale, they may not feel comfortable to share information. And then one big red flag, and I know it's easy, but at the same time, it won't give you the results that you want, is you don't want to over rely on surveys, right? You're not going to get meaningful feedback if you're just going to surveymonkey.com, creating a quick survey and then sending it out to your workforce and hoping that it's going to give you all the information that you need to detect employee sentiment. It'll give you some information, right? Normally, the participation rate is somewhere around 5-10% in those surveys. You may get 15-20 with direct action, but you won't get the voice of the silent majority, right? You really have to create that environment, create that culture where employees can share that feedback. And I know as a data analyst, it's hard to say, those are not mappable data points, but they are. If you formalize the informal and collect notes, or collect Word documents of this information. You can put it into word clouds, and you can analyze maybe some textual type of analysis if it's too much information. And data is not just numbers, right? It's also feedback that you're listening and getting from your employees. So this is definitely the most direct way of finding if there's an employee morale issue. Of course, all of the other ones are important as well from an organization standpoint. I would argue most of them, if not all, there's already an existing employee morale issue. This would give you the most predictive way of detecting if an employee morale issue is in the horizon. Those are all the methods that I have found useful within the business environment to be able to detect employee morale issues. If you have a unique situation, definitely feel free to contact me and we can definitely talk through your particular organization's situation. Feel free to contact me. My email is down below. You can also contact me on LinkedIn. It is Emmanuel Gutierrez. You'll find me there. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you stuck by the whole length, I really appreciate it. And feedbacks are always welcome. And till next time, thank you so much.